Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. This episode begins in the quiet ache of burnout, not the dramatic collapse, but the persistent friction between what life demands and what we can offer. It's about the uneasy promise that if we just worked a little harder, organised a little better, optimised our time just right, we might finally feel in control. But what if that control never arrives? Drawing from Oliver Burkeman's reflections on time, finitude, and the myth of productivity, the episode gently invites a different question. What if our limits aren't problems to fix, but truths to live by? Woven through the conversation are ideas from Hartmut Rosa on resonance, Stephen Batchelor's contemplative memento mori, and the soft provocations of Zen practice. It touches on the Protestant work ethic, the structure of schooling, the false morality of effort, and the quiet seductions of feeling busy. Instead of pushing toward more, it asks how we might stop without guilt, without collapse, and listen to the life we're already in. There are no systems to implement here, no 5-point solutions, just a possibility that what we call burnout may actually be the moment we begin to see clearly. You can feel it before you name it. The background buzz of insufficiency, the sense that every moment not optimized is a moment wasted. That stopping, truly stopping, is either a failure of will or a luxury you haven't earned. Berkman calls it productivity debt, but it's older than any job title. It's a moral script, a deep cultural catechism that says you must keep proving your right to exist every day through what you produce, respond to, complete. And if, by nightfall, you've broken even, you're permitted one more day. This isn't about work, not exactly. It's about meaning reframed as utility, about value tethered to output. And when these expectations are met, not with success but fatigue, it starts to feel personal, like a private failing rather than a systemic fantasy. You were promised that with the right habits, tools and mindset, balance was possible, but every checkbox ticked seems only to reveal more. The promised land of control stays on the horizon, receding just as you get closer. Some call this burnout. Others might recognize it as a spiritual inversion where grace is replaced by merit, rest by guilt, and presence by performance. Berkman suggests the harder truth, that no system will ever deliver control, not because we're weak, but because life is not a solvable task. You are finite. That's not a flaw, that's the shape of your life. And it may be that real peace doesn't come from completing everything, but from letting go of the need to. To do this is not to give up, it is to shift. To notice that the most meaningful acts often happen when the list is left unfinished. That not every valuable hour is one that feels efficient. That some of your best contributions are not measurable. That a good idea, or a moment of connection, or a breath taken outside the system, all of these might be more real than anything scheduled. There is a kind of wisdom in putting down the burden, not because you're too weak to carry it, but because you finally see it was never yours alone. There's a strange relief in exhaustion, when the body gives what the mind won't allow, a limit. When the rituals of pushing through no longer work, when caffeine and urgency lose their edge, what's left is a kind of stillness. Not the peaceful kind, but the moment after collapse. And from there, a different kind of question begins to form. Not how do I get back to it, but why was I carrying so much to begin with? We often treat fatigue as a temporary inconvenience, a glitch to be managed, but what if it's a message? Not a weakness, but a boundary misunderstood. The architecture of our days is built on illusions of capacity, an endless stream of tasks, responses, performances that presume we can stretch indefinitely. We are trained to override ourselves, to praise effort even when it hollows us out. Rest is earned, not inhabited. Silence is filled. The system teaches us that enough is never enough. And yet, somewhere deeper, there is doubt. The question isn't just whether we can keep going, but whether this is what going should feel like. The day fills, but does not satisfy. The time passes, but never lands. We meet the requirements, but remain unmet. Behind the planning apps and productivity hacks is a simple, persistent ache. What if being alive wasn't meant to feel like this? There is no grand resolution, no ultimate rebalancing act, just an invitation to turn gently toward the discomfort rather than away from it. To listen for what your life is asking beneath the noise, to pause not as failure but as fidelity, to acknowledge that some part of you has been trying to stop, not because you are lazy, but because something in you remembers how to live. The day begins with calculation, not just of time, but of worth. How much can I do? How well can I appear? How quickly can I move from one obligation to the next without breaking rhythm? There's a peculiar violence in it, soft, sanctioned, and self-inflicted. It doesn't look like harm, it looks like responsibility. But beneath it is a quiet kind of grief, the feeling that life is passing while you try to manage it. We've made control a proxy for safety. Structure is praised, spontaneity treated with suspicion. Even rest must be productive, even leisure must be optimized. We plan our mornings to achieve serenity by noon, only to find that peace does not arrive on schedule. The sense of being behind is no longer about tasks, it's existential. You are not just managing time, you are managing identity. And identity in this frame must be earned daily. But what if the dissonance you feel isn't failure, it's clarity, a signal that something is misaligned, not within you, but around you? That the weight you carry isn't personal weakness, but systemic distortion. That the life you are trying to live was never meant to be lived at this speed, on these terms. That the metric itself, more, faster, better, has no real endpoint, only ongoing extraction. There is another way of knowing, not through force, but through attention. Not through dominance over the day, but through presence with it. The discomfort of stopping is real because it dismantles the illusion of necessity. When you do less, you are not less. When you rest, you are not failing. The voice that tells you otherwise may be familiar, but it is not true. The most radical act in a world that prizes output may be to simply say, I am already enough. There is an odd silence that follows the decision to do nothing. Not idleness, but intentional pause. At first it feels like absence of pressure, of movement, of certainty. But then something quieter begins to surface, a kind of noticing, the way the light moves across the floor, the way breath arrives unbidden, the way thought, when not pushed, begins to settle into something almost tender. It's easy to miss these moments when life is measured only by what gets done. We've mistaken tension for focus, noise for meaning, urgency for value. There is a kind of intoxication in being needed, in always having somewhere to be, something to prove. The emptier it feels inside, the fuller we try to make the calendar. But what if the blank space isn't void, but possibility? What if doing less doesn't shrink your life, but finally gives it room to breathe? The pressure to account for every hour is not just about time, it's about justification. The sense that to exist without obvious purpose is to somehow be in debt. This is rarely said aloud, but it shapes everything. We are taught to praise effort, even when it corrodes us, to treat exhaustion as evidence of commitment, and so we forget how to be in our lives without performing them. But there is wisdom in interruption, in the unplanned hour, in the decision not to fill the silence. This isn't about indulgence, it's about recalibration, about finding your own rhythm beneath the inherited ones. Not every day needs to be efficient, not every moment has to be accounted for. You do not need to be exhausted to be good. You do not need to be busy to be real. You are allowed to stop. The instinct to fill space is almost automatic. A blank hour is a challenge. A slow afternoon feels like a mistake. Even pleasure is interrupted by the whisper, what else could you be doing right now? There's a quiet tyranny in it, not enforced by others, but by the internalization of pace, performance, and invisible metrics. And when you try to rest, the restlessness doesn't go away. It just becomes louder, more agitated, harder to ignore. It's tempting to think the answer is escape, a holiday, a sabbatical, a better system. But what's really being asked is deeper. It's not just a break from work. It's a redefinition of what work means, of what effort is for, of what makes a life feel meaningful beyond the accumulation of ticks and replies and appointments kept. The real discomfort begins when you realize you've built your sense of worth on how well you perform being yourself. And yet there is also relief, not in quitting, but in seeing clearly. The kind of clarity that doesn't arrive as an answer, but as a soft disruption of rhythm, a slowing, a looking around. Not everything needs to be wrestled into shape. Not everything is a problem to solve. Sometimes the best thing you can do with a moment is let it be. This is not passivity. It is a different kind of participation, one that moves with time, not against it, one that recognizes limits as design, not defect. And in that, There is a strange kind of strength, the courage not to conquer the day but to meet it as it is. Not every act of meaning begins with ambition. Some begin in the decision to stay still. You begin to notice the places where friction lives, not the obvious ones, the deadlines, the meetings, the crowded inbox, but the smaller, more intimate tensions. The part of you that clenches at the thought of doing nothing, the way you resist ease, distrust quiet, equate stillness with failure. It's subtle, habitual, and deeply ingrained. A story you've absorbed, that your value is conditional and the conditions are always just out of reach. When you pause, the discomfort doesn't vanish. It changes shape. It becomes a murmur. Shouldn't you be doing more? There's always someone else doing more. And yet in that murmur, there's also a doorway. A moment to notice that the drive isn't always yours. That so much of what you call motivation is really a defense against shame, against irrelevance, against the fear that stopping means disappearing. But what if that's not true? What if the self isn't something to be proven, but something to be trusted, not built by output, but revealed by presence? Then the decision to stop is no longer avoidance, it's alignment. Not with a plan or a schedule, but with what your body already knows, that constant striving is not the same as living. That achievement is a poor substitute for belonging, that you are not a project to complete. In a world that teaches you to produce against the feeling of lack, choosing not to produce is a radical act. It's not about rejecting responsibility, but returning to relationship, with time, with self, with others. It is an invitation to be here without needing to earn it, to be present without the apology of busyness, to belong not because you're exceptional, but because you're here. There's a quiet intelligence in the part of you that resists, the voice that says, not this, not like this, not again. You've been trained to override it, to label it as laziness or fear or self-sabotage. But what if it's something else? What if it's wisdom softened by exhaustion, asking you to live differently, not more efficiently, not more intensely, just more truly? You don't need another method, you need permission to live a life that isn't calibrated by output. To take rest without strategy, to listen without interruption. This doesn't mean retreating from responsibility. It means holding it with care. It means understanding that urgency is not a moral imperative, that your worth isn't indexed to your inbox. That meaning doesn't always announce itself in bold type or calendar alerts. In this new space, the measure of a good day changes. It's not what you accomplished, but what you noticed. Not what you pushed through, but where you softened. The small acts of resistance become acts of reclamation. You took a walk instead of replying. You breathed before answering. You said no, not because you couldn't, but because you didn't need to prove that you could. This isn't about balance. Balance is just another word for control. This is about rhythm, seasons, the dignity of enough. You will still do things, make things, show up for others, but you will do it from a different place. Not deficit. Not debt, but groundedness. And when the world pulls at you, promising meaning just beyond the next task, you'll know the truth. Your life is not waiting at the end of the list. It's here. You begin to live in a different register, less about solving, more about sensing. The hours no longer stretch in front of you like a field to be conquered, but unfold as something to be received. You move more slowly, not from reluctance, but from reverence. And in that slowness, things begin to return. Curiosity, intuition, the faint rhythm of your own internal seasons, long buried beneath the noise of being useful. Not everything is simpler. Some things become harder. The clarity that comes with stopping also reveals what you were avoiding. The conversations deferred, the longings ignored, the quiet truths you dressed up as preferences or plans. But now there's room for them. They no longer need to shout, you are listening. And listening changes what is possible. What guides you now is not ambition or fear, but attention. You notice what holds your gaze, what opens your chest, what quiets the churn inside. You trust those signals more than the expectations you once memorized. The world doesn't always reward this way of being, but you are no longer living for reward, you are living for reality, for contact, for a sense of enoughness that arrives unannounced and does not need applause. There will still be tasks, pressures, demands, but they are no longer your definition. They are simply part of the landscape, not the shape of your identity. You show up where it matters. You rest when you must, you choose your pace, you trust your timing, and something in you begins to root, not as resistance but as belonging, not to an ideal but to the day itself. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. This episode was digitally narrated by Holly, who helps bring our ideas to life. And thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. They help us reach more people like you.